Welcome, Jocelyn. Thank you so much for coming on to speak to us. So, Jocelyn Crawley is a radical feminist thinker who resides in Atlanta, Georgia. She enjoys thinking, talking, reading, and writing about strategies for resistance that women and girls can utilize to create worlds marked by subjectivity and self-actualization. Above all, she believes that the most radical act a woman can engage in is reading radical literature. So that's fantastic. We agree with that. So welcome, Jocelyn. And your talk is the Brock Turner Chanel Miller case. And if you get started, I'll get the video, the slides up. But if it's okay, if you just get started, because it will take me a second to get the first slide. Great.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for having me, Joe Brew. It's awesome to be here. So the title of this presentation is Discursive Formations in the Creation and Perpetuation of Rape Cultures Following Brock Turner's Rape of Chanel Miller. And so the presentation is rooted in an article that is going to be a blog post on the absolutely amazing Wolf blog, the Women's Liberation Front, that Leah, Keith, and I have been discussing for a bit of time now. And the emphasis of the presentation is on Brock Turner and the rape of Chanel Miller and discourse surrounding it. But I want to give you some background to contextualize what I want to talk about. So this presentation involves a review of the language, ideas, and concepts that are utilized within rape cultures and how these aspects of communication between people in communities creates the conditions confluent with the perpetuation of rape cultures. The rape case I utilize to explore this concept is a Brock Turner versus Chanel Miller case. And to contextualize my argument that rape cultures are grounded in specific modes of speech and information exchange, I review the variegated yet highly similar conversations and communications that transpired amongst and between individuals who either insisted that Brock Miller did not rape Chanel Miller, or that if some form of indiscretion was present, it was not actually sexual assault. In making my argument, I utilize Foucault's concept of discursive formation to provide readers with a context in which to understand how language can and does operate within communities. So, what is a discursive formation? In his work, Foucault, a French historian of ideas and philosopher who was also an author, literary critic, political activist, and teacher, defines discursive formations as the system of beliefs, practices, and rules which determine how a particular concept or subject is discussed and understood within a unique social milieu. So to break that down, the idea is that in specific communities, in this case, communities that tolerate rape cultures, there are specific words, phrases, and concepts that circulate to define and determine what is being talked about, okay? And so what is a rape culture? A rape culture is a society or environment which maintains attitudes, beliefs, and ideologies which trivialize or normalize sexual assault and abuse. Some examples of beliefs and value systems that normalize violence would be objectification, hypermasculinity, heteronormativity, strict conformance to gender roles and rules, rape myths, and victim blaming. All right, so in my article that's being turned into a blog post, the American philosopher Linda Alcoff has specific things to say about discursive formations and their relationship to rape culture. And she says, rape cultures produce a discursive formation in which the intelligibility of claims is organized not by logical argument or evidence, but by frames that set out who can be victimized, who can be accused, which are plausible narratives, and in what context rape may be spoken about, even in private spaces. They don't tell us what is true. They tell us what can be true as opposed to nonsensical. Now, what does Alcoff's assessment mean for us? Alcoff is essentially stating that within a rape culture, discourse regarding whether an individual was actually raped is not rooted in logic or the presentation of evidence. Rather, the discourse within rape cultures involves discussion regarding whether the ostensible victim is credible, whether certain types of people can actually be raped, whether certain types of people can be accused, which narratives regarding rape make sense, and which spaces are appropriate for discourse about sexual assault, meaning that essentially within rape cultures, there's an attempt to control the conversation regarding what can be thought about and what can be said about in terms of women, girls, what rape is, and how it should be evaluated. All right. So in thinking about Linda Alcoff's assertion regarding the connection between discursive formations and rape culture, I decided that I agreed and that there are three specific types of arguments or ideas that circulate within communities that tolerate and perpetuate rape cultures. And I want to discuss them and examine them in context of the Brock Turner rape case. So the three things that I argue that happen and that take place in terms of language within cultures and communities that promote rape culture are these. One, they contextualize human character in ways that obscure logical analysis and are work to delegitimize the notion that rape warrants legal punishment. In other words, rather than focusing on the reality that a person has been raped, emphasis is placed on the good character of the rapist or the quote unquote bad character of the victim. That's number one. Two, they redirect attention away from the reality of rape and into other less problematic and disturbing ways to think about what can and does transpire between men and women. And three, they produce environments in which, even when the reality of rape is acknowledged, it is minimized or subjected to ambiguation. All right, so getting into the Brock Turner and Chanel Miller, I think many of us are familiar with this case, but I'll give a brief overview in case some of us are not. So the case involves former Stanford swimmer Brock Turner, who was convicted of sexual assault in 2016 after attacking an unconscious Chanel Miller. Miller's victim impact statement during Turner's sentencing went viral, leading to public outcry over the lenient sentence of 6 months in county jail. The judge, Erin Persky, was recalled by voters in 2018. Miller later revealed her identity and published her memoir, Know My Name, which addressed the failings of the justice system and campus culture in handling sexual assault cases. So, coming back to discursive formation, issue number one, which is how within rape cultures, individuals create discourse that downplays what has actually happened to the victim and rather places primacy on the character of the rapist. So, how did this happen? How did this actually happen in the Brock Turner rape case? In the case of Brock Turner, the process of creating discourse regarding the good character or nature of the rapist worked to obscure conversations regarding whether and to what extent legal and or social punishment should be exacted against the violator. For example, in contextualizing discourse regarding whether and to what extent Brock Turner should be punished under the law, Judge Erin Persky asserted, obviously, the prison sentence would have a severe impact on him. The defendant is youthful and has no significant record of prior criminal offenses. So in Judge Erin Persky's assertion, the primacy is not placed upon whether the sentence should be consonant with the reality of him having raped Chanel Miller, for which there was extensive evidence, but rather for the reality that he's young and that he doesn't have a record of prior criminal offenses. In other words, alluding to the reality that his character, having not committed a plethora of crimes, means that his sentence shouldn't be significant. Okay? Discursive formation number two. Within these rape cultures, as I was stating earlier, attention is directed away from the reality of the rape that happened and into other less problematic and disturbing ways to think about what can and does transpire between men and women. Now, how did this happen? Discursive formation number two transpires when Brock Turner's friend, Leslie Rasmussen, wrote a letter in his defense. And I'm going to give you an excerpt from the letter that she wrote in defense of her friend Brock Turner. I don't think it's fair to base the fate of the next 10 plus years of his life on the decision of a girl who doesn't remember anything but the amount she drank to press charges against him. And I hope you notice that discursive formation number one is present in her speech as well when she talks about or alludes to the fact that Chanel Miller was drinking. And that's another aspect of talking about the good character of the rapist and the quote unquote bad character of the victim. Okay, moving forward. I'm not blaming her directly for this, Rasmussen says, because that isn't right. But where do we draw the line and stop worrying about being politically correct every second of the day and see that rape on campuses isn't always because people are rapists? It is because these universities market themselves as the biggest party schools in the country. They encourage drinking. I think it is disgusting, and I am so sick of hearing that these young men are monsters when really you are throwing barely 20-somethings into these camp-like university environments, supporting partying, and then your mind is blown when things get out of hand. This is completely different from a woman getting kidnapped and raped as she is walking to her car in a parking lot. That is a rapist. These are not rapists. These are idiot boys and girls having too much to drink and not being aware of their surroundings and having clouded judgment. Okay, now how does this conform to discursive formation number 2, this issue of directing attention away from the reality that a rape happened and into less problematic and disturbing ways to think about what happens between men and women? So I argue in my article, turning into a blog post, Rasmussen's letter conforms to the second aspect of the discursive formation because her verbiage reconfigures sexual interaction between men and women so that it appears less problematic and disturbing than it actually is, as made manifest by the ongoingness of rape. In Rasmussen's letter, she asserts that what transpires between men and women in sexual interactions is actually not rape, but rather it's a less desirable form of sex which transpires in context of drinking and partying that leads to a form of only ambiguously, amorphously understood sex, which she refers to as things like getting out of hand, not rape. This is the way that individuals who operate within discursive formations and rape culture communicate about sexual assault. It is not, they frequently think and assert, that sexual assault is necessarily happening. It is rather, they argue, that something less problematic, like consensual sex that transpires against the background of drinking and partying. Okay. And discursive formation number 3, I argue that within rape cultures, people produce arguments that involve stating that if rape is acknowledged as a reality, it's also minimized or subjected to ambiguation. So Rasmussen is not the only individual who perpetuates rape culture through the minimization of rape or ambiguation of events which individuals are attempting to clearly define as rape. In a letter that he wrote to Judge Persky regarding his son, Brock Turner, Dan A. Turner asserts, these verdicts have broken and shattered him and our family in so many ways. His life will never be the one that he dreamed about and worked so hard to achieve. That is a steep price to pay for 20 minutes of action out of his 20 plus years of life. In referring to Chanel Miller's rape as 20 minutes of action, Turner minimizes the dehumanization that transpires when an individual is raped, as well as the ongoing dissociation and dissonance that sexual assault engenders. Turner's misapprehension of temporality is unveiled when he thinks of sexual action as lasting just 20 minutes. In reality, individuals who endure unwanted sexual interactions frequently report that the trauma results in long-standing pain. This pain can be intermittent, coming and going in seemingly aleatory ways. It can also be perpetual and systematic, reflecting a seemingly inexplicable rhythm whose consistent constancy results in psychosomatic unraveling. In other words, to say that rape is essentially 20 minutes of action is minimizing the reality that it has long-standing impacts, both psychologically, emotionally on the victim. So how the discursive formations of rape culture ruin everything, as patriarchy always and only can. When considered in terms of its constituent elements and how those individual components operate to create one cohesive entity, the role that discursive formation outlined above can play in impacting responses and receptivity to the reality of rape is plain, I argue. Rather than facilitating awareness and understanding regarding what sexual assault is and how it impacts individuals, the discursive formations which surface within rape cultures support and sustain immersion in a world of illogic regarding the existence, nature, scope, and impact of sexual assault. These discourses perpetuate a key aspect of patriarchy, false consciousness, through a plethora of language processes which invert reality or subject it to the confusion which results from attaining an only ambiguous understanding of what actually happens. This fragmented and false understanding of reality precludes individuals from thinking accurately and responding appropriately to sexual assaults as they transpire. And one could argue that the breathtakingly lenient sentence of Brock Turner attests to the way that these discursive formations, which one might construe as just or only the words that people use to think about rape, negatively alter material reality. Now, progressive discursive formations, or as is referred to in many academic communities, counter narratives. Despite the persistence of discursive formations that promote and perpetuate rape culture, whether intentionally or unwittingly. Progressive discourses, which involve speaking truth to power and unequivocally, abashedly condemning rape, exist and gain traction amongst individuals who are ideologically aligned to radical politics. As Turner's rape of Chanel Miller became the topic of discourse in progressive, empathic communities, new discourses, including the holding up of signs saying Stanford protects rapists, surfaced and caused many to be reminded that there are still individuals and communities who are willing to speak truth to power, both the power that individual men hold to rape women and the power that institutions like Stanford hold to protect the individual men who rape women. Relevance. What does this have to do with anything in 2025? As radical feminism and other feminists persist in the face of global patriarchy and male supremacy, the reality of rape is integral to the process of men ruling the planet must remain integral to our discourse. This is the case because rape persists at alarming rates. And despite the development and proliferation of discourses insisting that women have made progress, individuals who have studied the reality of sexual assault continue to report that little has changed. In reading through sections of a recent article on this issue, I noted that one legal expert reported that one of the problems we are still experiencing is that many rapists do not fear the law. Additionally, the law regarding rape is not consistently applied. And recognizing the longstanding impact that rape has on women and girls, it is important for radical feminists not to lose sight of sexual assault as integral to our discourse as other important issues, including how we want to respond to transgenderism, surface. So, summing it all up, because entire communities are exposed to and even inundated in the logic or illogic of discursive formations regarding rape culture, it is important for radical feminists to engage in the ongoing process of disambiguation by regularly outlining and unpacking the fictive, fragmented, and/or fallacious reasoning that individuals and communities oftentimes utilize to create worlds in which rapists receive little to no punishment for dramatically and negatively impacting the lives of victims. Their readers have the opportunity to reconfigure rapes such that there is assent to both the fact that they are actually happening and that something significant should be done about them. All right, thank you, women.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic. I'm going to bring in add spotlights, Mariah as well. What has thank you so much for that talk. And what has happened is I haven't seen that there are any questions, but there's a lot of discussion in the chat of people saying this is, like, well, quite a few people were saying that Foucault was a paedophile, so that's a sort of bad thing about him. Yeah, go on.
Yes. And I understand that argument. As an academic, my view is that an individual can produce an idea that is meaningful and relevant and that can be incorporated into our discourse, irrespective of whether we want to consider him or her to be a bad person or to have committed egregious acts. And I just want to say that I am adamantly and avidly against pedophilia. But
Yeah.
I think that this idea is very important.
Yeah, and then the ideas of how the rapist gets away because of these constructed discourses are really, really interesting. And because it sort of sometimes it just seems unbelievable that they can be let off with, was it 6 months that he
Yes,
got, Brock
yes,
Turner? It's just
yes,
horrific, isn't it?
yes. And also another thing that I thought about as I was reviewing and preparing over the last 24 hours, and I had almost forgotten, was there were two eyewitnesses who saw what was happening. So if the argument was about what actually happened, there were eyewitnesses, but yet the illogic of the community continues to persist, and the words and the phrases or detract from the reality of what actually happened and keep going back into other realms when the legal system is here specifically to convict criminals based on evidence. And so
Yeah.
the arguments, the fantastical nature of it all is that what actually happened doesn't appear to matter.